purpose of this video is to give some helpful tips and tricks on replacing the fuel pump on a C6 Corvette. Now, issue I was having is the car has about 95,000 miles, wide open throttle. When the car got hot, it was dropping fuel pressure, and I felt that because it would just lose power. It didn't seem like it was misfiring. That's, obviously a check engine would throw if something was misfiring. I didn't have a check engine light on anything to do with my fuel pump. I did have a check engine light with a fuel sensor level going out. Very common issue on the C6 Corvette. Wide open throttle, when the car got hot, it would just lose power. And I finally got a pressure gauge on there, stuck it kind of through my hood, and I'll show a video of that after this. And when that was happening, it would drop from 60 psi all the way down to 20. And if you feel that ever happening on your car, let off. You're getting extremely lean function on your engine, and that can blow up your engine if you keep doing that again and again. So, if you feel that issue, let off of it. But in this video, kind of a preface, I first pulled out the wheel well and saw that I have a Kinney Bell booster pump, and that was like, oh shoot, maybe they put on the booster pump to fix this issue, or maybe they just put it on with another fuel pump module. I didn't really know. One of my tests was disconnecting that fuel pump booster and connecting just the original plug and seeing if that worked. Still had the same issues, so that kind of ruled out the booster pump. Also, you don't really need a booster pump on the Z06 if you're under 600-ish wheel horsepower. Now, I don't have any facts to back that up, so take that with a grain of salt. Everything that I've seen online is you can push, people are pushing 600 wheel horsepower. The first thing that's going to go out as far as like pushing high horsepower in the Z06 is your injectors are probably going to lose capacity before your fuel pump is. So another thing I wanted to mention, sorry I'm kind of sporadic, so bear with me here, but if you have any issues with your fuel pump, check your electrical side first before you just go and swap the fuel pump, because the fuel pump on this car is very difficult to replace. I have confidence that whoever's watching this video, you can probably do it. I did it myself. It took some time, and I'll explain some tips and tricks in that here in a minute. But check out your electrical side first. I cannot tell you how often that the relay gets loose, or something gets hot, or a ground doesn't have a good connection. The C5 and C6s are notorious. I pulled out 5 of my grounds, and they're all connected to a painted surface, not metal to metal. That's no good. You need to take off those grounds, clean up the surface, connect it, and make sure it has a very strong connection there. That's at a minimum. Start with your electrical side before you start pulling your fuel pump. So if you check all of that, check your relay, check fuses, make sure that it's getting power and it's not something electrical. If you rule all of that out, also check the ground connection underneath the wheel well and inspect your wires there. And that's kind of, I won't go through this in this video. There's a lot of other good videos on how to do that, but you got to pull off the tire, take off the trim on the wheel well, and then drop the plate that holds the fuel pump in place. Check out other videos on YouTube for that. Still highly encourage, watch this video. There's some tips and tricks in here that you've got to do. So when I took out the fuel pump, it ended up that I had a booster, Kinney Bell booster, and an aftermarket fuel pump module. It appeared to be a Racetronics fuel pump module. I right now can only find 2, one of which is a Racetronics kind of boosted fuel pump module, and then one that requires external pressure regulation. I don't think I obviously didn't have that because mine had a pressure regulator, very similar to the OEM pump, but supposedly boosted up. That fuel pump module, I don't know to this day if it was the fuel pump itself that gave out, if one of the connections inside of there was leaking and losing pressure. From everything I saw, I think that something in that module or the crossover tubes between the tanks, if one of those is loose or not connected right, you're just going to be losing pressure like crazy. And it's really important that the O-rings and all of those connections are tight and don't leak. Otherwise, you can be losing pressure. And it makes sense. After the car got really hot, everything kind of expanded. Something inside of there was getting loose and not working correctly. The pump, obviously the pump module is aftermarket, so it seems like the wear and tear on that shouldn't be extensive to the, it doesn't have 200,000 miles on the pump. And it's also that Racetronics pump module is rated for E85, so I don't think that caused the issue. Pretty sure something inside there was leaking. Anyway, regardless, I took a risk and I thought, you know what, this car is definitely not making anything over 600 wheel horsepower. I'm just going to put in the stock OEM setup and see if it works. And that's what I did, and it's been working fine. It's been about 300 or 400 miles. I've got it hotter than I've ever had the car before, and that's when the issue was happening, and it hasn't done it yet. So 99% sure I fixed the issue. If something happens, I will let you guys know, but that's proof that under 600 wheel horsepower, the OEM pump module and the wires going to it are perfectly fine for most applications below 600 horsepower. I took out the booster pump. I'm not running E85, and everything seems to be working fine. Also, one other quick tip. Whenever you replace the fuel pump on this, assuming that you're just below 600 horsepower, or maybe it's the sensor you're replacing and thus you have to pretty much do the whole module, but make sure you get the Z06 fuel pump module. The base Corvette is not as beefy or robust, and it's not applicable to the Z06. So don't get just a base model. Make 100% sure that whatever fuel pump module you get is for this car. I personally kind of took a risk and got an O'Reilly's Precision Z06 fuel pump module. That's what I put in there. I've had good luck with their fuel pump modules, not as much with their alternators or starters, but the Precision fuel pumps, I believe, are made in the United States. Not that that makes it any better than China or Japan or whatever, but anyway, it worked and it's still working. So just, yeah, wanted to let y'all know.
Now, like I said, I don't go through everything on how to take out the fuel pump. Watch some other videos for that, but the basics are disconnect your battery. You've got to jack up the car at least 24 inches to be able to get the fuel pump tank out. Then you got to take off the tire. You got to take out these trim pieces. There's some bolts around here, pretty straightforward. And then there's a bracket, aluminum bracket that holds the tank inside. You got to drop that. What I ended up having to do is I had to drop the bracket that holds the fuel tank up on both sides to give enough clearance on the crossover tube to allow me to drop this tank. Another critical thing is make sure that the crossover interior lines are lined up. If one is like this and the other is like this, they obviously won't connect. So be sure to do that right. Fuel pump is out. Overall, getting to the fuel pump, doing off the lines up there, that's not too hard. Reaching up, pushing off the clip, pulling the metal hose back off, that's not too hard. I've physically found no way to pop off these lines. I kind of just pulled and wiggled and pulled and wiggled for 20-30 minutes until they just came loose and the whole thing came out. This is physically larger. This isn't a bad engineering. This is an error in engineering. So the OD of the hole at the fuel pump is not only smaller, it's like a good 1/4 of an inch smaller, to where it is physically impossible to take this without breaking it or dremeling around there, unless you squeeze it and smash it out, which is pretty much physically impossible. Anyway, had to break this getting out, looking for part number, a GM part number, not finding it. This definitely looks like a new pump, doesn't look like the OEM pump. So, you know, the biggest question now is this for a Z06? If it's not, that might be my issue. Alright, some very important tips that you must do when reassembling this. So a lot of people, basically, this is the old crossover tube, which is already inside. Some people kind of leave it dangling out, put the fuel pump in, then feed it through, then grab something like this, which I think for this job is almost a must-have. Like, this is like one of the only things that would work unless you made like a flat head that's really long that kind of hooked. And the reason being, you have to fish up this line, which is this, connect it, then, and more importantly, and I feel like some people don't do this, and it's supposed to be like this. So this top loop needs to go in that port right there, and it needs to feed back down into the tank. That's how it is stock, and the reason being, that's your crossover tube from your other tank, and it keeps the pump cool and fuel supplied to it. It's extremely important to have that, because, you know, it sucks pressure relief, goes to your fuel manifold on the car, and then also feeds over to the other tank, and then feeds back, and then it goes into the tank. You have to get that crossover tube. So the best way I found was I personally got a little piece of wire, connected both of the two, which this isn't the best way, I don't think, looking back. I kind of hooked it right here, left it in the tank, fed the wire up through here, got my pump in. Also, you have to make sure that your fuel bobbers, like when you first put it in here, and have these wires in here. And then once you feed it in and get the tank in, then you can kind of pull up your wire and then use something like this to kind of grab. I pulled up this first piece right here using this, got it connected, popped it on, and then what took me almost 30 minutes now is getting this other tube connected and fed back into the tank. It's very important that you do that. And after I get the tank back in, I'll get these clips popped in. I'm going to put just a little bit of grease and make sure these two O-rings are clean. Normally I would say replace them, but if your vehicle isn't too old and they look healthy, I wouldn't worry too much about it. If you smell a lot of gas, whenever you fill up to a top tank, sometimes that means these are leaking. So if yours does that, I would recommend replacing these. Also, just envisioning worst case scenario, before you put this back together, make sure that your floater isn't caught up or bound or bent or anything like that. It's not too hard to do. Just get a flashlight or something right before you get everything in its place where you think it's gonna go. And I can't see it right now, I'll have to put the phone down, but look inside and make sure that bobber is free. Alright, got this all together. Just another test is, hopefully you have this tank empty, but you can lift it up and then kind of put it back down, and you can hear the floater slapping back and forth just to verify that it's free and loose. Yeah, everything's good to go. I'm gonna put just a little bit of grease on these O-rings. I might try and put just a hair, actually no, I'm gonna put just a tiny little bit of grease up on the hoses that pop into this, and then I should be good to go. Alright, I have spent almost an hour trying to get that reconnected, specifically with the tabs. Those just, it seems like that metal slot is too far out still, and I'm not getting it fully inserted. So I'm going to try one last time, and then I'm worried that the tubing inside is not properly seated or connected, and I don't want to break things. So if not, I'm going to drop it again, and I'm going to mark where that tubing is facing. That way I know it's aligned once I have these connected. Second time popping this off. Reason being, forgot to put the plug. What an idiot. But anyway, learning several things. So I want y'all to look at, if it'll focus, this line, or that little dot, and that green line right here. So that corresponds to in line with this. You also want to make sure the tabs in here are locked in place to where this doesn't move. If they're broken or loose, you got to figure a way to, hold them tight. So, and you also have to make sure, if you look, these hoses are in line with that dot. I marked this dot, and then I want to make sure this dot is centered with the line here. And the reason being, on the tank itself, you've got these hoses, and their notches, which also need to line up with that same exact line. Everything needs to line up, and it's kind of hard to gauge that. Also putting not like gobs, but just a fine layer of white lithium grease, something petroleum based, especially on this outer tube as well. So I'll have an easier time getting this in and seating on the O-rings. Anyway, so round 2 of this with the plug installed this time. Golly. So I have a TI Automotive C6 Corvette. I think this is a Racetronics fuel pump kit, but the pump is a TI Automotive. I'll try and get the part numbers and everything, but I'm not going to say that this is the cause of my issue. I'm just kind of noticing the build quality of this and you know, kind of how it's lasted. So wanted to point out a couple things. One of which is the gasket for this plug right here deteriorated and fell apart. When I took out the pump, before I even unplugged this, it had fallen apart and kind of was just in pieces. Here's one of the pieces. So it wasn't really making a good seal. So a couple different flow paths. One is, that's the line from the fuel pump, this ribbed line that goes up. It goes outside of the filter assembly, it goes around and through this line, which is your crossover line, the white one. That one is disconnected, but normally that would run to your other tank and suck up fuel from it and push it back to this tank when it needs it. This one, this black one, goes to your pressure regulator. That's inside of this housing right there. But with it running off a 12-volt battery, I just wanted to kind of point out everything that I'm seeing. So this line goes to your, pretty small. That line goes to the other tank. And check this out. Look how much is leaking out from where the filter is. Now I have had this off, but I put in the O-ring and everything seemed to have seated fine, and it's still leaking a lot from outside of this. So I wanted to point out some differences between this and basically OEM fuel pump. This is a precision pump from O'Reilly's, which hesitant to get anything electronic there besides OEM, but I found it's pretty hard to find an OEM Z06 fuel pump. But just a couple things, and I might have already pointed this out before, but the plug rubber inside of this guy gave out. It was all like crinkled up and falling apart when it was in here, which, yeah. And then if you look at the wiring at the bottom, that gauge wiring is pretty much just as thick as the original pump, you know, wiring. So it's like, why have this thick wire come down and just choke it back down? Like, how does that help anything? Because you still have the same gauge going to the bottom. I'm finding it's a little bit difficult to pull the pump on this one and look at that. So I'm not going to for the time being. Another big thing is, look at this fuel gauge sensor. That's the old. This is the one off the Racetronics one. It just has these 2 tabs, and it was failing. It had a bunch of check engine light, so it's just running across those 2 things. One of the wires broke loose. I'm sorry, it's back. It's in the back. But anyway, so notice that. And then look at this. It's got much thicker, heavier material, and the prongs, it's kind of hard to see. The prongs are much wider, thicker, and they have a much greater surface area to go over this. It just seems like this is a far better design. has more tension on it. Now I have seen these types fail before, but it just seems like between these two, this one is a lot better. Well, quick update. I've driven almost 300 miles. Seems like it's fixed the issue with the fuel. This is the hottest day I've ever driven the car. And I've just kind of been on the highway, sitting in traffic. The engine's really hot, no issues. It's not dropping fuel pressure. So I think that fixed it. I'll update if I have any more issues, but yeah, I'm happy.